The first thing I remember isn't the laughter, it's the sound of clapping that never quite reached me. The living room was dressed for celebration, gold balloons floating near the ceiling, a long table covered with food my mother had prepared since early morning, and a cake with congratulations written in neat blue letters. My graduation cap rested beside it, slightly tilted, as if even it didn't know where it belonged. People filled the room, family, friends, distant relatives, neighbors who had known me since I was small. They smiled, hugged me, told me how fast time had passed. I thanked them politely, the way I had been taught to do. Calm, grateful, easy to overlook. My brother stood near the center of the room, confident, relaxed, holding a drink he didn't really need. He had always looked comfortable in attention, like it fit him naturally. When he laughed, people leaned in. When I laughed, people nodded and moved on. My father stood up first. He tapped his glass gently, and the room quieted. I felt a small spark of hope rise in my chest, fragile, careful, almost embarrassed to exist. This has been an important year, he began. But then he said my brother's name. He spoke about ambition, about leadership, about how success had followed him from a young age. He mentioned his plans, his future, how proud he was to see one of his children, stepping confidently into the world. Applause filled the room. I clapped too, slowly, politely. My name wasn't mentioned. My mother stood next. She smiled warmly, her eyes shining the way they always did when she talked about him. She added her own praise, how he had always known what he wanted, how some people were just born ready for life. Then she turned to me. Her smile softened, but it didn't deepen. "Well," she said lightly, "and here's something for you." She handed me an envelope. Thin, plain, lighter than I expected, a little something. She laughed, just until you figure things out. The words were casual. Almost kind. I opened it. Inside was a card you could buy last minute at a grocery store. No handwritten note. No message folded into the crease. Just a printed congrats, and a $20 bill placed neatly inside. For a moment no one spoke, then someone laughed, another followed, not cruel laughter, not mocking. The kind of laughter people use when they are uncomfortable but don't want to question why. "Oh, parents," someone joked. I smiled. I had learned that smile early, the one that keeps things moving, the one that reassures everyone else that nothing is wrong. Inside, something shifted. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shock, it was recognition. I understood, suddenly and clearly, that this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't thoughtless, it wasn't about money, it was about expectation. My brother was celebrated for what he might become. I was rewarded for staying quiet while becoming nothing at all. As conversations resumed, people drifted away from me naturally, like water around a stone. I stood there holding the card, nodding when someone caught my eye, laughing softly when it felt required. No one asked how I felt. No one asked about my plans. I helped my mother in the kitchen later, rinsing dishes, listening as she talked about how proud she was of the kids. Her voice warm and vague. I didn't interrupt her. That night, when the house finally emptied and the balloons sagged low with tired air, I sat alone on my bed with the card in my hands. I stared at the printed words and realized something quietly devastating. I had been earning love through patience, through understanding, through not asking for too much, and tonight they had shown me exactly what that earned me. I didn't cry. I folded the card carefully and placed it in my drawer. Something told me I would need to remember this moment, not with bitterness, but with clarity, because this was the night I finally saw the truth. And once you see it, you can never pretend you didn't. I didn't cry that night. That surprised me. I had always been the kind of person who felt things deeply, sometimes too deeply. But instead of tears, there was a strange stillness inside me, like my emotions had decided to sit down and wait. The house was quiet after everyone left. The music had stopped. The balloons drooped toward the floor, their shine dulled by the passing hours. I washed the last of the dishes while my parents talked softly in the living room, replaying the night as if it had gone perfectly. No one mentioned the card. No one asked if I was okay. In my room, I changed out of my dress and folded it carefully, the way I did with things I wasn't sure I would need again. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle around me. The laughter from earlier replayed in my mind, not loudly, but persistently. It wasn't the sound itself that hurt. It was how easily it had happened, how natural it felt to everyone else. I realized then that this moment wasn't isolated. It belonged to a long pattern I had refused to name. I thought about birthdays where expectations were always lowered for me, about achievements that were met with nods instead of celebration, about how my mistakes were remembered longer than my efforts. I had told myself stories to survive those moments. They mean well. They're just practical. They worry about him more because he needs it. But sitting alone in that room, the truth felt unavoidable. I wasn't overlooked by accident. I was overlooked because everyone had learned I would endure it. 3 days passed quietly. My parents acted normal, pleasant even. My brother talked freely about his future, his voice confident, already moving ahead. I listened, offered polite responses, smiled when expected. Inside, I was paying attention in a new way. I noticed how quickly praise flowed in his direction, how easily my presence faded into the background once I stopped filling the space. I noticed how often my parents spoke about me rather than to me. On the 3rd day, my mother suggested we all sit together, just to wrap up the celebration. She said, as if it were something unfinished. Coffee was poured. Chairs scraped softly across the floor. I sat where I always did, slightly to the side, visible but not central. That was when the doorbell rang. A man I didn't recognize stepped inside. He carried himself calmly, professionally, as if he belonged in serious rooms. He introduced himself with a polite smile and held a folder close to his chest. He explained he was from a foundation. At first, no one understood why he was there. My parents exchanged glances, confused but curious. My brother leaned back, uninterested. Then the man said my name. It landed softly, but it changed everything. The room fell silent in a way that felt different from before. This silence wasn't dismissive, it was alert. He spoke about academic perseverance, about resilience, about late nights and quiet consistency. He mentioned a professor who had written about a student who asked thoughtful questions, who stayed after class not to impress but to understand. I felt my throat tighten. He said I had been selected for a fully funded program, tuition, housing, and research support. An opportunity that would take me far from this room and everything it represented. No one laughed. My mother's face froze, her smile caught between pride and surprise. My father nodded slowly, as if recalculating something he thought he already knew. Someone finally clapped. Others followed, but the sound felt hesitant, uncertain. I didn't stand. I didn't speak much. I thanked the man quietly. What struck me most wasn't their reaction. It was my own. I felt calm, not triumphant, not vindicated, just steady, because this moment didn't erase the one before it. It didn't rewrite the laughter or soften the meaning of that thin envelope. It simply revealed the truth I had already begun to understand. Recognition that arrives only after proof is not belief. It's revision. That night, as the house returned to silence again, I knew something had shifted permanently. Not in them, but in me. I stopped hoping they would see me differently. And in that release, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. After that afternoon, nothing dramatic happened. No arguments, no apologies, no sudden change in how my parents spoke to me. And somehow, that was the loudest part. Life continued as if something extraordinary hadn't just been revealed. My mother asked what I wanted for dinner. My father reminded me to be practical. My brother joked about how unexpected my news had been, as if surprise were a compliment. I listened, I spoke less. Silence became my teacher. I began to notice how often my parents rewrote the past without saying they were doing it. My father mentioned how they had always encouraged education. My mother told a relative on the phone that she had known all along I would do something impressive. They said these things lightly, casually, like facts that had simply been waiting for the right moment. I didn't correct them. I realized that truth doesn't need defending when you're no longer asking for permission to exist. In the days that followed, my parents became gentler with me, not warmer, just careful. Their compliments were tentative, almost rehearsed, as if they were testing unfamiliar words in their mouths. "You've really matured," my mother said one evening. What she meant was, "You surprised us," and I understood then that this version of approval came with conditions. It arrived only after I had proven myself useful to their image of success. I stopped trying to earn it. Instead, I prepared quietly. I completed forms. I packed books. I sorted through old belongings, deciding what deserved to follow me forward and what could stay behind without regret. As I moved through my days, I noticed how calm I felt. The anger I expected never arrived. There was grief, yes, but it was clean. Honest, it didn't ask for revenge or recognition. It simply asked to be acknowledged. One night, I sat with my mother at the kitchen table. She watched me carefully, as if I were someone new. "We always wanted what was best for you," she said. I nodded. I didn't say what I had learned, that wanting isn't the same as understanding, and intention doesn't erase impact. Some truths are wasted on rooms that aren't ready to hold them. My brother avoided talking about the scholarship. When he did, it was framed as luck, timing, a nice opportunity. I didn't argue. I understood that minimizing my achievement helped him preserve the story he needed about himself. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for protecting that story. What surprised me most was how peaceful distance could be, even before physical separation. I began to live from a place slightly removed, present but no longer invested in approval. I stopped over-explaining, stopped filling silence, stopped translating myself into something easier to accept. The world didn't collapse. Instead, it grew quieter, and in that quiet, I met myself fully for the first time, not as the patient daughter, not as the reliable second choice, but as a woman with her own rhythm, her own limits, her own worth unchanging, even when unseen. As my departure date approached, my parents grew reflective. They spoke about sacrifice, about family unity, about how important it was to stay connected. I listened kindly, but I understood the difference now between connection and access. Love does not require constant availability. Respect does not demand silence, and belonging should never be conditional on shrinking. The night before I left, I packed the last of my things. At the bottom of my drawer, I found the cheap card from my graduation. I held it for a long moment. Then I placed it back, not as a wound, but as a reminder. Some lessons are given quietly, wrapped in disappointment instead of celebration. And sometimes the greatest gift a family gives you without meaning to is the moment you finally learn to choose yourself. The morning I left, the house felt different, not sad, not heavy, just aware. Sunlight slipped through the curtains in narrow lines, touching the familiar corners of my room. The walls were bare now, the shelves empty. Everything I needed fit into 2 suitcases and a small bag I carried myself. I stood in the center of the room and took one last breath, not because I was afraid to go, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to stand here without wishing I were someone else. In the kitchen, my mother moved quietly, preparing coffee no one really wanted. My father, sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, pausing every so often as if searching for the right words and then deciding against them. No speeches were made. My mother hugged me first. Her arms lingered longer than usual. "We're proud of you," she said softly. I believed that she meant it, in the way she knew how I know. I replied, and I did, that was the truth. They were proud now, proud in retrospect, proud because my success no longer required imagination. My father stood and nodded. "Be smart," he said. "Take care of yourself." I smiled. "I will." What I didn't say was that I already had. My brother stayed in the doorway, hands in his pockets. There was something unsettled in his expression, something that might have been respect or uncertainty, or the quiet realization that I was no longer behind him in the story he had been telling himself. "Good luck," he said. "Thank you." I answered I meant it, not because everything had been forgiven, but because resentment no longer lived where my peace had moved in. Outside, the air felt lighter. The car door closed with a solid, final sound. Not dramatic, not symbolic, just real. As the house disappeared in the distance, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't replaying old moments. I wasn't rehearsing things I wished I'd said. I wasn't carrying anger with me like unfinished business. I had already said what mattered through consistency, through quiet strength, through choosing a life that didn't require me to beg for recognition. Distance did what confrontation never could. From afar, our relationship found its proper shape. My parents called more often at first, then less. When we spoke, the conversations were calmer, politer, no longer crowded with expectations. They asked about my studies. About my days, they listened more than they used to. I didn't share everything. Boundaries, I learned, are not walls. They're filters. Over time, I noticed something else. The weight I had carried for years was gone, not because anyone apologized, but because I stopped asking the people who hurt me to heal me. I found pride in my work, peace in my routines, strength in knowing that my worth didn't fluctuate based on who clapped the loudest. Sometimes, late at night, I thought back to my graduation party, to the laughter, to the card, and instead of pain, I felt clarity. That moment hadn't broken me. It had introduced me to myself. The lesson settled gently, like something that had been waiting for me all along. You don't need to prove your value to people who benefit from you doubting it. You don't need revenge to find justice, and you don't need permission to step into your own life. I didn't leave angry. I left whole, and that, I realized, was the most powerful ending of all.